Tonight, let's slow things down and step quietly into the past. Before alarms, electricity, or soft mattresses, how did medieval people actually sleep? Did they really share beds with family or even strangers? What did nights sound like in a world lit by candles and ruled by the rhythm of the sun? In this video, we'll gently explore how people in the Middle Ages ended their days, from evening routines and sleeping arrangements to the curious habits that shaped their nights. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let history unfold at a calm, unhurried pace. If you enjoy peaceful stories like this, please like the video, it really helps the channel. Share your thoughts or questions in the comments, and let me know what part of medieval life you'd like to explore next. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more calm history to relax, learn, and drift off to cliff. When you're ready, let's begin and discover how medieval people slept. When night fell on the medieval world, it did not arrive gently. It did not glow. It did not hum. It came down like a curtain. As the sun slipped behind hills and rooftops, light drained from the land. No switches were flipped. No street lamps flickered on. The sky darkened. The last birds settled, and the world grew quiet in a way that feels almost impossible to imagine today. For medieval people, night was not an extension of the day. It was a different state of being. Once the light was gone, it was truly gone. Candles were expensive. Oil lamps were dim. Torches smoked and sputtered. Most homes used firelight sparingly, letting the flames sink low as evening stretched on. Shadows gathered in corners. Walls breathed softly with the sound of wind and wood. Outside, the darkness was thick. Roads vanished. Fields dissolved into blackness. The stars felt closer, brighter, and far more watchful. This was a world without background noise. No engines, no buzzing wires, no distant traffic. At night, sound carried easily. A footstep, a cough, a door creaking 2 houses away. Silence was never empty. It was full of small things, and that silence had weight. Darkness in the medieval world was not neutral. It pressed on the mind. It stirred thoughts that daylight kept quiet. Night was when worries grew long shadows, when prayers felt more urgent, when fear had time to sit beside you. People believed the night belonged to more than just humans. Spirits moved more freely after sunset. Demons wandered. Witches worked. Angels passed unseen. Even if you did not fully believe these things, you respected the night enough not to argue. The medieval night was a time of vulnerability. Gates were closed. Fires were watched carefully. Families gathered closer together. Being alone after dark was not brave. It was risky. And being awake too late could feel suspicious, even sinful. So sleep was not just rest. It was retreat. To lie down at night meant surrendering awareness. It meant trusting that the walls would hold, that the fire would not spread, that thieves would not come, and that unseen things would pass you by. Sleep was a small act of faith. In medieval homes, bedtime followed the sun more than the clock. When daylight faded, work slowed. Tools were set aside. Animals were checked one last time. Food was eaten early, often while there was still a bit of light to see it. As evening deepened, people prepared not just for sleep, but for night itself. Doors were barred. Shutters were closed. Fires were banked low, covered with ash to keep embers alive without flaring. Prayers were said aloud or quietly, sometimes memorized, sometimes improvised. Children were gathered. Elders settled into familiar spots. Then, one by one, people lay down. There were no glowing screens to stare into, no endless scrolling, no late-night shows. When the fire dimmed, there was little else to do but listen to the room breathe and let the dark take over. This made sleep feel different, heavier, deeper, more deliberate. Medieval people did not think of sleep as a pause button. They saw it as a necessary crossing. Each night, you stepped into darkness with no guarantee of waking. Death in sleep was common enough to be feared and rare enough to be prayed against. Many went to bed with the thought, if I do not wake, let me be forgiven. Cheerful stuff, really. But there was comfort too. Sleep meant warmth, stillness, and relief from aching bodies. For laborers, it was the only true rest they would know. For the wealthy, it was a brief escape from responsibility. For everyone, it was a shared human rhythm, and it was deeply ritualized. Certain prayers belonged to night, certain gestures, the sign of the cross, a whispered plea, a familiar phrase passed down through generations. These habits wrapped around sleep like another blanket. Even humor had its place. Medieval writers sometimes joked about sleep, stealing time from prayer. or about husbands snoring like thunder beside annoyed wives. People then, like now, noticed the small absurdities of bedtime. Still, night demanded respect. The darkness could hide dangers both real and imagined. Fires could start unnoticed. Animals could wander in. A knock at the door after sunset was never casual. It made hearts beat faster. That is why medieval sleep was often communal. People felt safer together. Alone in the dark, thoughts could spiral. Together, the presence of others grounded the mind. And so, as the medieval world settled into night, sleep became a shared surrender. Imagine lying down in such a place. The room is dim, lit only by a fading glow. The smell of smoke lingers in the air, mixed with wool, wood, and earth. Outside, the wind moves through trees you cannot see. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then goes quiet. You pull your covering closer. The floor creaks as someone shifts nearby. A child sighs in sleep. The fire crackles softly, then settles. There is no clock telling you the hour. Time feels slower here, wider. The dark does not rush. It waits. This is the medieval night. A world ruled by firelight and silence. A world where sleep is not taken lightly, but entered carefully, with prayer, habit, and a little hope. In the chapters that follow, we will explore how medieval people understood sleep, where they slept, what they slept on, and how night shaped their lives in ways we are only now beginning to remember. But for now, let the darkness settle. The night has fallen. To medieval people, sleep was not a science. It was a gift. They did not speak of brainwaves or circadian rhythms. They did not track hours or count sleep cycles. Instead, they believed sleep came from God, like rain or sunlight, given in proper measure and taken away when misused. Sleep was something you were allowed to have. In medieval thought, everything had moral weight, including rest. Sleeping well was not just about feeling good the next day. It was about living correctly. Too little sleep made you weak, impatient, and prone to sin. Too much sleep made you lazy, indulgent, and spiritually dull. Finding the right balance mattered. Religious texts shaped this view deeply. The Bible often described sleep as peaceful and holy, but also warned against sloth. Saints slept little, sinners slept too much. Somewhere between those two extremes lived the ideal Christian sleeper, resting just enough to rise ready for prayer and work. Sleep was preparation. People believed the body needed rest so the soul could function properly. A tired body led to wandering thoughts. Wandering thoughts led to temptation. And temptation, as medieval sermons loved to remind people, rarely ended well. So sleep was meant to sharpen discipline, not replace it. Medieval scholars leaned on ancient thinkers to explain how sleep worked. Aristotle believed sleep cooled the body and calmed the senses. Galen, whose medical ideas dominated Europe for centuries, thought sleep helped rebalance the body's humors. These humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile were believed to control health, mood, and behavior. Too much of one caused illness. Sleep helped keep them in balance, especially after eating or physical labor. This meant timing mattered. Going to bed too soon after a heavy meal was discouraged. Sleeping on a full stomach was thought to cause bad dreams, sickness, and sluggish thinking. Doctors advised gentle movement or quiet conversation before bed, though they probably underestimated how quickly people fell asleep after exhausting days. Sleep position even mattered. Lying on the right side was often recommended first, then turning to the left. Why? Because medieval medicine said it helped digestion. Whether it actually did was less important than believing it did. Belief carried power. Sleep was also closely tied to obedience. Monasteries regulated sleep carefully. Households followed patterns set by tradition. Children learned early when to lie down and when to rise. Ignoring these rhythms was not rebellious. It was unhealthy and improper. People did not catch up on sleep. They did not sleep in on weekends. Their rest followed the sun, the seasons, and the church calendar. Feast days changed sleep. Fasting days changed sleep. Winter lengthened nights. Summer shortened them. Sleep bent to the year like everything else. Dreams were another reason sleep mattered so much. Medieval people believed dreams could come from many places. Some were sent by God, others came from the devil. Many were simply the result of digestion, which meant last night's dinner might be to blame for your nightmare. Dream manuals were popular. They explained symbols, warnings, and meanings. A dream of falling could mean danger. A dream of water might mean change. A dream of flying could mean spiritual pride, which was not a compliment. Not all dreams were trusted. but none were ignored completely. Because sleep opened the mind, it was seen as a vulnerable state. While awake, you could guard your thoughts. While asleep, your mind wandered freely. This made prayer before bed especially important. Many people ended their day by asking for protection during sleep. Protection from bad dreams. Protection from temptation. Protection from dying before morning. Yes, that last one again. Death during sleep was common enough to worry about, but also peaceful enough to be desired by some. To die in bed was better than dying suddenly in the fields or violently in the street. Still, most hoped to wake up, so they asked politely. Sleep was also tied to social order. Waking early was praised. Rising before dawn for prayer or work was considered virtuous. Sleeping late suggested indulgence. Even nobles, who could afford leisure, praised early rising as a sign of good character. This did not always match reality. Of course, people complained about noisy neighbors, snoring relatives, and restless nights just like we do. Medieval letters include jokes about sleeplessness, stiff backs, and beds that did not cooperate. They were human, but the ideal remained firm. Good sleep produced good people. Bad sleep weakened the soul. Doctors advised moderation. Priests advised prayer. Parents advised routine. Together, these shaped a shared understanding. Sleep was necessary, but never an excuse. Even children were taught this early. Going to bed was not framed as punishment. It was framed as obedience. Rest made you ready to learn, work, and serve God. In this way, sleep became part of moral training. It also meant people blamed themselves when sleep failed. Insomnia was not a medical condition. It was a disturbance. Something was out of balance. Too much food, too much worry, too much sin, or not enough prayer. The solution was rarely try harder to sleep. It was live better. That might sound harsh, but it also gave people a sense of control. If sleep was a gift, you could prepare yourself to receive it. You could live in a way that welcomed rest. So medieval sleep was intentional. You did not simply collapse into bed. You approached sleep with care, humility, and routine. You trusted that rest would come if you had earned it. And most nights, after long days and fading fires, it did. In the next chapter, we will leave ideas behind and step into physical spaces. We will look at where medieval people actually slept, and how the very idea of a bedroom was something most could only imagine. For now, let the thoughts settle. Sleep, in the medieval mind, was not something you took. It was something you were given. In the medieval world, the idea of a bedroom as a private, quiet space was rare. For most people, it simply did not exist. Homes were not designed around sleep. They were designed around survival. A medieval house, whether a peasant cottage or a noble hall, usually had one main room. This space did everything. It was where meals were cooked and eaten, where tools were stored, where animals might be brought in during bad weather. And when night came, it became the place where people slept. By day, the room was busy and loud. By night, it slowly transformed. Benches were cleared. Tables were pushed aside. Straw was shaken out. Bedding was unrolled. The same floor that felt hard and cold under working feet became a place of rest. Privacy was not expected. Silence was not guaranteed. Families slept together because space demanded it. Parents, children, grandparents, and sometimes servants all shared the same room. In poorer homes, they often shared the same bed. In slightly better off homes, there might be more than one sleeping surface, but walls rarely separated sleepers. The medieval household slept as a unit. This was not considered strange. It was normal. Warmth, safety, and familiarity mattered more than personal space. Being alone at night was unsettling. Being together felt right. In large homes, like manor houses or castles, things were only slightly different. There were more rooms, but they were still shared. The great hall, where people ate and worked during the day, often became a sleeping space at night for servants and guards. The lord and lady might have a chamber, but even that chamber was rarely private. Servants slept nearby. Children came and went. Important guests might be invited to share the room. Privacy was flexible, not fixed. Bedrooms, as we think of them, came much later. In monasteries, sleeping arrangements followed strict rules. Monks and nuns slept in dormitories, long rooms lined with beds or pallets. These spaces were quiet, orderly, and shared. No one slept alone unless illness required it. Even there, sleep was communal. Where you slept said a lot about who you were. Social hierarchy was visible at night. The best sleeping places were raised, warmer, and farther from drafts. The worst were near doors, on floors, or close to animals. Children slept low. Elders slept where it was warmest. Servants slept where they were needed. Beds were valuable objects. Not everyone owned one. For many medieval people, a bed meant a simple wooden frame, or even just a straw-filled sack placed on the floor. This was called a pallet. It could be rolled up during the day and stored away, freeing space for work. This made sense. Space was precious. Nothing was used for only one purpose. Even in wealthier homes, rooms shifted roles constantly. A chamber used for meetings during the day could become a sleeping space at night. Furniture was minimal. Flexibility mattered more than comfort. The idea of a room existing solely for sleep would have seemed wasteful. Sleeping arrangements also followed rules of behavior. Who slept near whom mattered. Men and women were often separated unless married. Older children slept apart from younger ones if space allowed. Guests were given places of honor, even if it meant reshuffling the household for the night. There was a rhythm to it. People knew where they belonged when darkness fell. No one needed instructions. The household settled naturally, shaped by habit and custom. And then there were animals. In rural homes, animals often slept indoors or just outside the door. Chickens, dogs, cats, and sometimes larger animals shared the space. They provided warmth, protection, and noise, which might sound annoying, but also reassuring. A quiet house could feel dangerous. A snorting cow or scratching hen meant life was nearby. Medieval people were not aiming for silence. They were aiming for safety. The lack of private bedrooms also meant sleep was social. People talked before bed. They prayed together. They told stories. Children listened as adults spoke quietly in the dark. This was not bedtime in the modern sense. It was a slow winding down of the household. Light faded gradually. Conversations softened. Movements slowed. One by one, people lay down. In wealthier households, curtains or screens might be used to create some separation. Bed curtains did more than keep warmth. They created a small sense of personal space in a shared room. Closing bed curtains was like closing your eyes while still awake. Still, sounds passed through easily. Breathing, shifting, snoring, coughing. Sleep was never isolated. It was layered. This closeness shaped how people thought about rest. Sleep was not a private retreat. It was a shared state. You entered it knowing others were near. That had advantages. If someone became ill in the night, help was close. If a fire started, it would be noticed quickly. If fear crept in, there were familiar bodies nearby, but it also meant little control. If someone tossed and turned, everyone noticed. If someone snored, everyone suffered. Medieval humor includes plenty of complaints about bad sleepers and noisy bedmates. Some things never change. The absence of bedrooms also shaped how people woke. Morning did not arrive quietly. It arrived all at once. Someone stirred. Someone else followed. Soon the room was alive again. Beds were folded away. Pallets rolled up. Straw was shaken out. The space returned to its daytime role. Sleep left no permanent trace. This way of living made sleep feel temporary and practical. You borrowed the space for the night, then gave it back. Only the very wealthy began to create rooms meant mostly for sleeping, and even then, those rooms were busy places. Important conversations happened in bedchambers. Guests were received there. Business was conducted there. The bed was central, not hidden. In the medieval world, sleep did not demand isolation. It accepted closeness. To lie down at night was to trust the people around you, to share warmth, air, and sound, to rest not as an individual, but as part of a small community bound together by walls, habits, and darkness. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at the beds themselves, what they were made of, how they felt, and what it was really like to sleep on them, night after night. For now, imagine the room settling, the floor cooled beneath you, the soft rustle of straw, the quiet presence of others nearby. This was sleep, before bedrooms existed. If you could step into a medieval home at night and look closely at where people slept, the first thing you would notice is that the bed was not always a soft invitation. Sometimes it was barely an invitation at all. A medieval bed was not a single object. It was a collection of layers, choices, and compromises, shaped by money, class, and luck. For the wealthy, a bed was a statement. For everyone else, it was simply something to get through the night. Let us start with the frame. Many medieval beds were made of wood, sturdy but simple. The most common type was the rope bed. A wooden frame held a network of ropes stretched tightly across it, woven back and forth like a net. On top of this went the mattress. Over time, those ropes loosened. This led to a problem medieval people knew well. The bed would sag in the middle. The solution was to tighten the ropes regularly. This is where the phrase "sleep tight" likely comes from. It was not poetry. It was maintenance advice. If you did not tighten the ropes, you slept like a banana. For poorer households, there might be no frame at all. Just a pallet on the floor. A sack stuffed with straw, reeds, or chaff laid directly on the ground. These could be rolled up during the day, but at night they offered very little separation from cold floors. Cold was always nearby. The mattress itself depended on what was available. Straw was common. Chaff, the leftover bits from grain processing, was cheaper but less comfortable. Wool was better, but harder to come by. Feathers were the luxury option, mostly reserved for nobles and wealthy merchants. Feather beds were prized. They were soft, warm, and expensive. They also had a habit of shifting, clumping, and swallowing sleepers whole. Medieval writers occasionally complained about sinking too deeply into feather beds and waking with sore backs. So even luxury had its drawbacks. Bedding did not stop at the mattress. On top came sheets, blankets, and sometimes furs. Linen sheets were valued, but not everyone had them. Woolen blankets were more common. They were heavy, warm, and itchy, very itchy. Cleanliness was relative. Sheets were not washed often. Laundry was hard work. Water had to be hauled. Fires had to be lit. Soap was basic and harsh. Bedding might be aired out, shaken, or left in the sun, but full washing was rare. This meant smells lingered. Smoke from the hearth soaked into fabric. Sweat stayed. Animals brushed against bedding. Everything carried a faint reminder of daily life. This was normal. No one expected beds to smell fresh. And then there were the insects. Bedbugs were a known problem. Fleas and lice were common companions. People accepted this as part of sleeping. There were remedies, of course. Herbs were stuffed into mattresses. Bedding was beaten. Smoke was used to drive pests away. None of this worked very well. Scratching in the night was common. So was waking up with bites. Medieval people joked about it, complained about it, and moved on. A bed without bugs was a rare blessing. Despite this, beds were valued. They were often listed in wills. A good bed could be passed down through generations. Losing a bed meant real hardship. Beds were also heavy and hard to move. Once set up, they stayed where they were. This made them central features of rooms, not tucked away objects. In wealthier homes, beds were raised high off the floor. This kept sleepers away from drafts and vermin. It also made the bed more impressive. Climbing into bed required a small step or stool. Canopies and curtains were common in these beds. They were not decorative, at least not primarily. They trapped heat. They blocked drafts. They offered some privacy in shared rooms. Closing the bed curtains created a small world within the room. Inside, it was warmer, darker, and quieter. Outside, life continued softly. For the poor, there were no curtains, just blankets pulled close and hope that the night would be kind. Pillows existed, but they were not soft clouds. They were stuffed with straw, feathers, or rags. They were small and firm. Some people slept without them, believing flat sleeping was healthier. Doctors often agreed. Sleeping posture mattered. Medieval medical advice suggested sleeping slightly upright for digestion or turning sides during the night. Beds were not designed for sprawling. They encouraged stillness, and beds were shared. Very often, married couples shared beds, of course, but so did siblings, children, servants, and guests. Sharing a bed saved space and heat. It also meant you learned to sleep carefully. Rolling too much was rude. Kicking was noticed. Snoring was unforgivable. People developed habits around this. Some slept rigidly, others curled in on themselves. Children learned quickly how not to annoy the person next to them, or at least how to pretend they were asleep when scolded. The bed was not a private escape. It was a negotiated space. Noise was part of the experience. The creak of wood, the rustle of straw, the squeak of ropes. Beds spoke at night. Every movement announced itself. This made sneaking difficult and patience necessary. Despite all this, people slept, often deeply. After long days of labor, discomfort faded into the background. Bodies adapted. What seems unbearable to us was simply normal to them, and there was comfort too. Warmth from shared bodies, familiar smells, the weight of blankets, the knowledge that morning would come, as it always did. Beds were imperfect, but they were enough. They held people through illness, childbirth, storytelling, prayer, and death. Many medieval people were born in beds and died in them. The bed was a central place in life, not just for sleep. So when medieval people lay down at night, they did not expect luxury. They expected rest, warmth, and survival until dawn. And most nights, that was enough. In the next chapter, we will look at what people wore or did not wear when they climbed into these beds. Because medieval sleepwear, like medieval beds, followed its own logic. For now, imagine the mattress beneath you, straw shifting softly, ropes creaking once, then settling. The bed holds. The night continues. When medieval people climbed into bed, what they wore or did not wear might surprise you. There was no such thing as pajamas, no matching sets, no fluffy robes waiting by the bed. Sleepwear in the Middle Ages was simple, practical, and often optional. Many people slept naked. This was not shocking to them. It was normal. In fact, for a long time, sleeping without clothes was considered healthy. Doctors believed bare skin helped the body breathe. Clothes trapped heat, sweat, and bad air, which they thought could lead to illness. So if you could stand the cold, sleeping naked made sense. Of course, not everyone could. Most medieval homes were cold at night. Fires burned low or went out completely. Windows were small and poorly sealed. Winter nights were long and unforgiving. In these conditions, naked sleep required strong blankets, shared bodies, or a high tolerance for discomfort. Many people chose a middle ground. Linen nightshirts were common, especially among those who could afford them. These were loose, long garments, worn by both men and women. They were not fancy. They were simple rectangles of fabric sewn together, easy to wash and comfortable to sleep in. Linen mattered because it was cleanable. Wool was warm but itchy and hard to wash. Linen could be boiled and beaten clean. This made it valuable, especially for something worn close to the skin. Women often slept in chemises, similar to long shirts. Men wore long shirts, or simply kept their undergarments on. Children slept in whatever they already had, or nothing at all. There were no strict rules, only habits. Class made a difference. Wealthier people owned more clothing, so they could afford separate garments for sleeping. Poorer people owned very little. Sometimes, what you wore during the day was all you had. At night, you loosened it, removed heavy layers, and lay down. In extreme cases, people slept fully clothed, boots included. This usually happened during travel, in inns or during times of danger. Comfort was less important than readiness. Religious attitudes added another layer. The church did not forbid sleeping naked, but it encouraged modesty. Couples were advised to behave respectfully, even in bed. Monks and nuns slept clothed, usually in simple garments, to avoid temptation and maintain discipline. Sleeping naked was practical, but it required discretion. In shared sleeping spaces, people adjusted. Parents shielded children. Adults turned away from one another. Bed curtains helped. Darkness did the rest. Privacy was flexible, but modesty still mattered. Weather played a big role. In summer, sleeping naked or lightly clothed was easier. In winter, layers returned. Some people slept in wool caps to keep their heads warm. Others wrapped spare clothing around their feet. Cold feet were a serious problem. Medical texts warned that cold extremities could lead to illness. Keeping the feet warm was important. This led to creative solutions. Extra blankets, warm stones placed near the bed, even animals sleeping close by. Clothing at night was not about style. It was about survival. There was also the matter of cleanliness. Since bathing was rare by modern standards, changing sleep clothes helped manage hygiene. Sleeping naked allowed sweat to dry and air to circulate. Sleeping in linen allowed washing without cleaning heavier garments. People understood this, even without modern science. There were beliefs about what not to wear as well. Tight clothing was discouraged. Belts were removed. Anything that restricted the body was thought to disturb sleep and digestion. You were meant to rest freely. Children followed similar patterns. Babies were often swaddled, wrapped tightly in cloth to keep them warm and still. Older children slept in simple shirts or nothing at all, depending on the household. Elderly people usually slept more clothed. Age brought cold, stiffness, and discomfort. Extra layers helped. There were also superstitions. Some believed sleeping naked made you vulnerable to spirits. Others believed it made you less tempting to them. Medieval logic could point in both directions. Most people followed what felt right. Humor crept in here too. Medieval writers joked about nightshirts riding up, about spouses stealing blankets, about waking tangled in linen and limbs. Sleep was serious, but it was also awkward. Sharing a bed made clothing choices noticeable. If someone slept naked next to you, you knew. If someone wore too many layers, you felt it. Temperature negotiations happened silently throughout the night. One person pulled the blanket, another pulled it back. Some things never change. There was also the issue of emergencies. Fires, thieves, sudden illness. Sleeping naked meant scrambling for clothes in the dark. This made some people uneasy. Others accepted the risk. In dangerous times, people slept dressed. During plagues, wars, or unrest, being ready mattered more than comfort. But in peaceful nights, simplicity won. The act of undressing before bed marked the end of the day. It was part of the ritual of sleep. Removing clothes meant setting aside labor and worry. It signaled trust in the night. You lay down as you were vulnerable but hopeful. So medieval sleepwear was not uniform. It changed with class, season, belief, and personality. Some slept wrapped in linen. Some slept bare under wool. Some slept stiff with cold. Some slept warm and deep. What mattered was not what you wore, but that you slept. In the end, medieval people did not obsess over sleep clothes. They used what they had. They adapted. They complained a little. Then they rested. In the next chapter, we will look at how they fought the cold more directly, using fire, shared warmth, and clever tricks to survive long nights without modern heating. For now, imagine the moment before sleep. Clothes loosened or set aside, blankets pulled close, the body settling into stillness. The night waits, indifferent but familiar. For medieval people, cold was not an inconvenience. It was an enemy. Night brought it quietly. As the sun faded, warmth slipped away from walls, floors, and bodies. Stone held the cold. Earth breathed it upward. Wind found every crack and seam. And once the fire dimmed, the house cooled fast. Staying warm through the night was a daily challenge. The hearth was the heart of the medieval home. By day, it cooked food and heated the room. By night, it became something else entirely. It was watched, adjusted, and negotiated with. Fires were rarely left roaring overnight. Wood was precious. An open flame while sleeping was dangerous. So instead, fires were banked. Ash was pulled over glowing embers, slowing the burn and keeping just enough heat alive to restart the fire in the morning. This made nights colder, but safer. The glow of the hearth faded into a dull red, then darkness. Heat lingered briefly, then thinned. The room cooled hour by hour. Everyone knew this. Everyone planned for it. Beds were placed as far from drafts as possible. Corners were avoided. Doors were blocked. Shutters were closed tight. Any cloth available was used to seal gaps where cold air crept in. Still, winter nights were long. This is where bed design mattered. Heavy blankets helped. Wool was especially valued for warmth, even if it itched. Furs were prized among the wealthy. Sheepskins and animal hides were used by poorer households whenever possible. Bed curtains played a major role. In larger beds, especially among nobles, curtains enclosed the sleeping space on all sides. These were not decorative. They trapped heat, blocked drafts, and created a small pocket of warmer air. Inside a curtained bed, the world shrank. Breath warmed the space. Body heat lingered. Sounds softened. The cold stayed just outside the fabric walls. For those without curtains, blankets were pulled high. People slept close together. Sharing a bed was one of the best ways to stay warm. Body heat mattered more than personal space. This is one reason beds were shared so often. It was not only tradition or lack of space, it was survival. Children slept between adults. Elderly family members were given the warmest spots. Pets curled close. Dogs slept at feet. Cats slept wherever they pleased, which was usually wherever it was warmest. Animals were not just companions, they were heaters. There are records of people sleeping with livestock nearby during extreme cold. This was not ideal, but it worked. Heat mattered more than smell or noise. People also used objects to bring warmth into bed. Hot stones were common. Stones were heated in the hearth, then wrapped in cloth and placed near feet or tucked under blankets. Heated bricks served the same purpose. These provided warmth for a while, then slowly cooled. Care had to be taken. Too hot, and you could get burned. Too cool, and they did nothing. It was a careful balance learned through experience. Some people filled metal or ceramic containers with hot water. These were early versions of hot water bottles, though far less refined. Leaks were a risk, but when they worked, they were appreciated. Clothing played a role too, as we saw earlier. Wool caps kept heads warm. Extra layers were wrapped around legs. In bitter cold, people slept, dressed, regardless of medical advice. Doctors might prefer naked sleep, but frostbite had a strong counter-argument. Seasonal changes shaped sleep deeply. In summer, heat could be the problem. Fires were smaller. Windows might be opened slightly. People slept lighter and more spread out. In winter, nights were long and dark. People went to bed earlier and stayed there longer. Sleep stretched with the darkness. This was not laziness, it was adaptation. Cold also influenced how people moved at night. Getting out of bed was unpleasant, very unpleasant. Once you were warm, you stayed still. This made nighttime wakefulness quieter. People moved less, they spoke softly, they avoided unnecessary trips into the cold room. This made the bed feel like a refuge. Even so, the cold was always present. You could feel it on your nose, your fingers, your feet. Breath fogged faintly in the air. Blankets were pulled tighter as the night deepened. Medieval people accepted this. Complaining did not make it warmer. They told stories instead. They prayed. They slept in shifts. They woke briefly, adjusted blankets, then slept again. Fire safety was always on their minds. Houses were made of wood, straw, and cloth. One spark could destroy everything. Many towns had rules about fires at night. Curfews were announced by bells. Open flames were discouraged after certain hours. Candles were extinguished early. Torches were not used indoors at night. Darkness was safer than fire. This made nights dim but calm. The cold also shaped architecture. Thick walls helped. Small windows reduced drafts. Low ceilings trapped heat. Everything was built to conserve warmth as much as possible. Still, no building was truly warm by modern standards. Medieval people did not expect comfort. They expected endurance. And yet, there was a strange coziness to it all. When the wind howled outside and the world froze, the shared warmth of a bed, the familiar presence of others, and the soft crackle of dying embers created a sense of shelter. The cold made warmth meaningful. It made blankets precious. It made closeness comforting. It made sleep deeper when it came. People learned how to listen to their bodies. When fingers went numb, they shifted. When feet grew cold, they tucked them closer to someone else. Sleep was flexible, responsive. Modern heating removed this struggle. It also removed the awareness. Medieval people felt the night on their skin. They knew when winter was coming. They respected it, so when they lay down, they did not assume warmth. They earned it. Through preparation, habit, and community. Fire was their ally, but only when controlled. Blankets were their armor. Shared bodies were their shield. Together, these things made sleep possible. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most surprising parts of medieval sleep. The idea that people did not sleep in one long stretch, but in two distinct parts, with a waking hour in between. For now, imagine the bed growing colder as the night deepens. The fire glows faintly. The wind presses against the walls. You pull the blanket closer and settle in. The battle against cold continues, quietly, through the dark. If you think people in the Middle Ages slept through the night like we do today, think again. Most medieval people did not experience 8 hours of uninterrupted slumber. Instead, they practiced something that might sound strange to modern ears: segmented sleep. It worked like this. After sunset, people would go to bed relatively early. The first hours of darkness were spent in what historians call the first sleep. This was deep, restorative sleep, often lasting 3 to 4 hours. The body rested, muscles relaxed, minds quieted. Then, around midnight, something unusual happened. People woke. This was not a rude awakening or a nightmare. It was normal, expected, even useful. The first sleep ended. The night had a pause, and the second sleep awaited. During this waking period, people did a variety of things. Some stayed in bed, talking quietly with spouses or family. Conversations were gentle, sometimes intimate. Some couples took this time for closeness, knowing that daylight schedules were demanding. Others prayed. Midnight prayers were common, especially among the devout. Monks and nuns followed strict routines. Household prayers were less formal, but just as sincere. People asked for protection, reflected on the day, or recited scripture from memory. A few went about quiet chores, tending a dying ember, feeding a cat, checking on animals, all while moving softly so as not to wake others. In some cases, people left their homes. The streets might be dangerous, but brief trips were necessary, collecting water, checking fires, or attending to emergencies. This waking hour was not idle. It was a natural part of the night. an intermission between sleeps. After an hour or so, people returned to bed for the second sleep. This usually lasted until dawn. It was lighter than the first sleep, but still restorative. People rose with the morning, ready for work, prayer, and the day ahead. Segmented sleep had advantages. It allowed people to attend to practical needs without waiting for morning. It encouraged reflection and spiritual practice. It gave couples time together. It created a rhythm attuned to the natural night rather than the mechanical clock. Modern sleep researchers have studied this. They note that before artificial light, waking briefly during the night was common. Humans are not naturally designed for uninterrupted 8-hour sleep. Segmented sleep matches what our ancestors often did. It also shaped dreams. People often had vivid dreams during the first sleep. Waking in the middle of the night made them more likely to remember these dreams. Some interpreted them as divine messages, warnings, or insights. Dream manuals were consulted. The waking hour was a time for reflection. This explains many medieval practices around dreams and spiritual vigilance. Of course, not everyone followed the same pattern. Wealth, location, and season affected sleep. In summer, nights were shorter, so the first and second sleep might blend. In winter, the long dark encouraged longer segmented sleep. Laborers, schedules, illness, and household size also played a role. Still, historians find references to this pattern across Europe. It was common enough to influence literature, folklore, and daily life. What changed? Artificial lighting, street lamps, candles, and later, gas and electricity allowed people to stay awake longer. The first sleep gradually disappeared. People shifted to one longer, continuous sleep. Industrialization and regimented work hours reinforced this. By the modern era, segmented sleep was largely forgotten, yet traces remain. Have you ever woken briefly in the night, then fallen asleep again? That is the ancient rhythm. Our bodies remember it, even if our schedules do not. There was humor here too. Some medieval writers joked about spouses waking, only to find the other snoring, or children waking early and disturbing their parents' second sleep. Life went on, even in the middle of the night. But for many, this waking hour was peaceful. It was a quiet interlude, a pause in the rush of life, a moment for reflection, intimacy, and preparation. Imagine it. The first sleep ends. Your body feels rested. The room is still, except for soft breathing and the distant crackle of a dying fire. You stir, you stretch, you speak quietly, you pray, or laugh softly, or check on a sleeping child. The world is calm. The darkness is steady. You are neither fully awake nor fully asleep. You exist between states. Then, slowly, the second sleep draws you back. Your body relaxes again. Your mind drifts. The night continues, carrying you toward dawn. Medieval people understood this rhythm intuitively. They planned for it, accepted it, and shaped their lives around it. Sleep was not a single block of time. It was a flowing experience, in 2 acts, with the waking hour as a bridge. As we move to the next chapter, we will explore the spiritual side of these nights. Prayers, dreams, and the mystical world shaped how medieval people understood darkness and sleep. For now, imagine the pause in the night, the soft stirrings, the quiet reflections, the gentle return to rest. This is the rhythm of the medieval night. For medieval people, night was never just about the body. It was about the soul. Darkness was a doorway, and sleep was more than rest. It was a time when the spiritual world seemed closer, more present, more active. Angels, demons, and mysterious forces were believed to move freely after sunset, and this shaped how people prepared for bed. Prayer was central. Before laying down, many recited formal prayers or whispered personal petitions. The Lord's Prayer, Hail Mary, and Psalms were common. Some households kept prayer books by the bed. Others relied on memory, passing traditions from parent to child. Saying prayers was a kind of insurasa, spiritual firewall against nightmares, illness, and unseen danger. Monks and nuns had stricter routines. Night offices, observed in the middle of the night, required them to rise from their dormitories for prayer. Silence, discipline, and devotion were demanded. Their sleep was measured, monitored, and sometimes deliberately interrupted for spiritual benefit. Exhaustion was a test of piety, not just endurance. Dreams were another reason sleep carried such weight. People believed dreams were messages, some divine, some diabolical. A good dream could foretell success, warn of danger, or provide insight. A bad dream could be a moral warning, a temptation, or even a sign of impending illness. Manuals for dream interpretation circulated widely, explaining the symbolic meaning of events, animals, and colors seen in sleep. Nightmares were taken seriously. Sleep paralysis, for example, had a supernatural explanation. If you woke unable to move and felt pressure on your chest, it was thought a demon or witch might be visiting. Remedies included prayers, protective charms, or sprinkling holy water near the bed. Fear was both spiritual and psychological. Bedtime precautions were as much about protecting the mind as the body. Religious imagery pervaded even simple households. Angels were called upon for protection. Saints were invoked. Amulets, crosses, and written prayers were kept close. Some families hung small charms near the bed or under the pillow. Others followed strict nighttime rituals, extinguishing candles in a certain order, covering the head, or arranging bedding according to tradition. The waking hour between first and second sleep, discussed in the last chapter, was a prime time for devotion. People might kneel to pray, meditate, or reflect. In a world where day brought toil and responsibility, night became a sacred space for contemplation. Couples could pray together. Parents could whisper guidance to children. Individuals could commune quietly with God. Silence itself was a kind of prayer, a recognition of mystery in the dark. There was also humor and human resilience. People noticed absurdities in spiritual routines. Medieval texts joke about children falling asleep mid-prayer, adults fumbling with candles, and pets interfering with devotional efforts. Life went on, even in the solemnity of midnight vigils. Sleep and spirituality intertwined with daily experience, not separate from it. The night carried moral significance. Darkness was dangerous morally as well as physically. Lying awake without prayer might invite temptation. Sleeping poorly could lead to sin through fatigue, irritability, or neglect of duty. Night was a test. Sleep was a practice. The two were inseparable in the medieval mind. Dreams were closely watched. A vivid or unusual dream was shared with others for interpretation. Some were written down, some were passed along orally. Dreams could dictate behavior the next day, which tasks to attempt, which interactions to avoid, which decisions might carry consequences. The boundary between dream and waking advice was thin. A sleeping mind influenced daily life. Fear of dying in one's sleep was also real. People prayed for a peaceful death, hoping to pass quietly and with God's blessing. Bedtime prayers often included petitions for health and safety. Death in the night was not rare, and preparation through faith was practical as well as spiritual. Yet, amidst all this, there was comfort. Prayer and ritual gave a sense of control. The darkness became a shared experience of protection and reflection. Even the poorest household could create a sacred space with simple words, a few gestures, and collective attention. Night was both frightening and reassuring. It invited reflection, intimacy, and caution. It reminded people of their place in the world, fragile, mortal, yet connected to something larger. Sleep, therefore, was not merely biological. It was moral, spiritual, and psychological. It was a crossing into a realm where the living and the unseen brushed close together, where dreams, prayers, and fears mingled, where the body rested and the soul prepared. Imagine it now. The house is quiet. Shadows move softly across walls. A gentle glow from embers illuminates faces. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone else hums softly. A child breathes evenly. The night feels alive and protective at once. Dreams hover near the surface of consciousness, waiting to be noticed or ignored. This is the medieval night. Sleep is not just rest. It is devotion, vigilance, reflection, a bridge between what is seen and what is unseen, and it shapes every waking hour to follow. In the next chapter, we will leave spirituality behind for a moment and look at the daily lives of peasants, how they slept, where they slept, and how exhaustion and practicality shaped their nights. For now, settle into the rhythm of the medieval night. The darkness is quiet, the embers fade, and sleep waits patiently. For most medieval people, the night was practical, not luxurious. Peasants made up the majority of the population, and their sleep was shaped by labor, seasons, and necessity rather than comfort or ritual. Daylight dictated everything. Fields needed tending from the first light of morning until dusk. Tasks like planting, harvesting, feeding animals, and maintaining the home left bodies exhausted by nightfall. When the sun dipped below the horizon, sleep was not a choice, which was the only way to recover. Peasant homes were small. Often a single-room cottage housed the entire family, and sometimes a few animals as well. The floor was dirt or stone, occasionally covered with rushes or straw for insulation. There were no dedicated bedrooms. Instead, the room transformed into a sleeping space at night. Straw mattresses, pallets, or simple blankets were laid out. Everyone claimed a spot, according to hierarchy. Parents in the warmest corner, children huddled together, and older siblings often taking the floor. Temperature mattered as much as space. Winter nights were bitter. Peasants shared beds whenever possible to stay warm. Parents and children curled close together, and animals contributed heat as well. Dogs, cats, and sometimes even chickens slept nearby. Sharing bodies was practical, not intimate. It was survival. Bedtime followed seasonal rhythms. In winter, nights were long, so people went to bed early and rose late relative to the sun. In summer, nights were short and sometimes interrupted by work or social obligations. The natural environment dictated sleep more than clocks or schedules. Peasant sleep was rarely uninterrupted. Some woke briefly during the night for chores, checking animals, stoking fires, or using the chamber pot. This was integrated into the rhythm of the night and rarely considered inconvenient. It was simply part of life. Hygiene and comfort were minimal. Bedding was rarely changed. Sheets, if they existed, were coarse linen. Mattresses were stuffed with straw or chaff, sometimes mixed with wool. Bedbugs, fleas, and lice were constant companions. Peasants accepted these discomforts because they could not do much about them. Humor often helped. There are records of jokes about itchy beds, scratching in the dark, and children rolling into one another. Despite the hardships, peasants developed strategies for better sleep. Hot stones or heated bricks were placed in beds for warmth. Thick layers of straw and blankets insulated bodies from cold floors. Even simple rituals like saying a prayer or whispering a lullaby helped prepare the mind for rest. The environment outside influenced sleep, too. Rural areas were quieter than towns, but not entirely safe. Wolves, foxes, or other predators sometimes roamed nearby. Fires had to be watched, particularly in winter. Thieves were a concern, especially on isolated roads. Sleep was both a necessity and a calculated risk. Work influenced dreams. Exhaustion often brought deep, vivid sleep. Laborers dreamed of fields, animals, and tasks yet to be done. Some interpreted these dreams spiritually, others humorously. Nightmares were attributed to spirits, demons, or even the discomfort of a full belly. Children's sleep was intertwined with adults. Babies were swaddled tightly. Older children slept next to parents or siblings, and everyone was accustomed to the noises and movements of co-sleeping. Children learned early how to sleep with minimal disturbance, to others a practical skill that shaped their behavior long into adulthood. Peasant sleep also fostered social cohesion. Families gathered close, shared warmth, and supported one another through illness or fear. The night was both protective and communal. Unlike modern expectations of solitude, closeness was comforting and necessary. Evenings were winding down periods rather than separate activities. People ate early, tended fires, completed chores, and then gathered for prayer, storytelling, or quiet conversation before bed. Humor, teasing, and song were part of the ritual. Laughter often lingered in the dark as people settled into their makeshift beds. Night was a time of adaptation. The peasant body, hardened by labor, adjusted to cold, noise, and discomfort. Sleep was not indulgence. Sleep was not indulgence, it was restoration. Without it, work suffered, health declined, and survival was jeopardized. In winter, the rhythm of peasant sleep extended longer. People went to bed as soon as practical and stayed there as long as the sun allowed. In summer, the schedule was more flexible, occasionally interrupted by light, labor, or festivity. Sleep followed nature, not clocks. Despite all the hardships, there was a quiet beauty in these nights. Families huddled close, animals curled up. The hearth glowed faintly, and the darkness outside emphasized the warmth and security inside. It was survival, yes, but also intimacy, rhythm, and continuity. Peasant sleep may have lacked luxury, but it was deeply human. It reflected labor, adaptation, community, and endurance. Every night was a negotiation with the cold, with exhaustion, and with the ever-present unknowns of the world. In the next chapter, we will move from peasants to the nobility. We will see how kings, queens, and wealthy lords approached sleepwear. The rooms were bigger, the beds higher, the blankets thicker, and yet the night still demanded respect. For now, imagine a peasant cottage at night, the smell of straw, smoke, and animals mingling. bodies pressed close together for warmth, the low murmur of prayers and conversation fading into sleep. Outside, the stars shine over quiet fields. Inside, life rests, momentarily suspended in darkness. If peasant sleep was about survival, noble sleep was about spectacle, ritual, and comfort, though not without its own challenges. Medieval kings, queens, and lords approached bedtime with careful planning, symbolism, and hierarchy in mind. Sleep was both a necessity and a display of status. The first thing you'd notice entering a noble bedroom, or rather, chamber, was the bed itself. It was large, elevated, and often enclosed by heavy curtains or a canopy. These beds were not just for warmth, they were for grandeur. Embroidered linens, furs, and feather mattresses signaled wealth, power, and taste. A visitor could tell a lot about the household just by seeing the bed. Sleeping arrangements were structured. The lord and lady of the house had the best position, often at the center or head of the room, raised on platforms to show prominence. Servants slept nearby, sometimes on the floor or on smaller pallets, ready to assist at a moment's notice. Guards might be stationed just outside the chamber, ensuring safety through the night. Privacy existed, but it was limited. The presence of attendants was a constant reminder of status and vigilance. Noble sleep was a ritual. Bedtime involved elaborate routines, washing, prayers, and dressing in night garments, which could include linen shirts, chemises, or even silk, in exceptional cases. The wealthy sometimes used perfumed oils or herbs to freshen the air. Candles or small lamps provided gentle illumination. The fire in the hearth was maintained carefully, both for warmth and for dramatic effect. Flickering light across tapestries and wooden panels. Temperature mattered, even in luxury beds, were layered with furs and heavy blankets. Canopies trapped heat, keeping the sleeper insulated. Winter nights were long and bitter, and even kings could shiver without proper preparation. Animals, usually small dogs, sometimes slept on the bed or at the foot of the canopy for warmth and companionship. Nobles often followed the same segmented sleep pattern as peasants. First sleep, a brief waking period, and second sleep, the waking hour, was used for prayer, reflection, or private discussion between spouses. Sometimes, nobles used this time for study or reading by candlelight. Letters might be written, or plans discussed with trusted servants. It was a quiet interlude in a world otherwise bustling with daytime power struggles. Despite comfort, noble sleep carried responsibilities. Guards were always alert. Valuables were nearby but not entirely secure. Fire was a constant threat in timbered chambers. Illness, accidents, or political unrest could intrude even in the most secure bedroom. Nobles slept with awareness, balancing relaxation with vigilance. Children's sleep was closely managed. Heirs might have their own small beds in the chamber, or sleep near their parents. Younger children were sometimes grouped in side rooms with nurses or governesses. Like adults, children followed routines of prayer, preparation, and careful attention to warmth and comfort. Humor existed even in noble quarters. Chronicles mention nobles waking to find bedmates snoring loudly, blankets stolen by servants, or pets disturbing the peaceful night. Even power and wealth could not eliminate human unpredictability. Winter and summer dictated different strategies. In summer, windows were opened slightly, fires were smaller, and lighter blankets were used. In winter, thick furs, heavy canopies, and extra attendants ensured warmth. The rhythms of nature shaped even the most luxurious lives. Sleep was also a social and political statement. The bedchamber was a semi-public space. Guests could be received there. Decisions were sometimes made from the bed, especially during illness. Visibility mattered. Sleep conveyed hierarchy, responsibility, and lifestyle. Finally, the night for a noble was a time of reflection. The darkness, the quiet, and the ritual allowed for personal contemplation, prayer, and sometimes intimate connection. Despite wealth, comfort, and protection, the medieval night demanded respect. No amount of luxury could erase the influence of cold, darkness, or the unknown. Imagine it, a grand bed, layered with furs and embroidered linen, curtains drawn to trap warmth, a fire crackling faintly in the hearth, servants nearby, attentive but unobtrusive, a noble lying down, hands folded, eyes adjusting to the dim glow. Sleep arrives slowly, enveloping body and mind, carrying the household into the rhythm of the night. In the next chapter, we will explore monastic sleep, how monks and nuns approached rest under strict rules, and how devotion shaped every moment of their night. For now, picture the grandeur, the ritual, and the subtle vigilance of a noble's sleep, comfort intertwined with duty, darkness filled with both calm and care. In the medieval world, monasteries and convents were places where sleep was governed as much by discipline and devotion as by the body's need for rest. For monks and nuns, sleep was part of a structured rhythm that balanced work, prayer, and spiritual practice. Monastic life followed the canonical hours, a schedule that divided the day and night into periods of prayer, study, and labor. Sleep was carefully allocated between these obligations. It was not indulgent, it was functional and spiritual. Beds were hard, rooms sparse, and comfort minimal. Luxury was considered a distraction from God's work. Dormitories were communal. Rows of wooden beds or pallets lined long, quiet rooms. Each sleeper had their designated spot. There was little movement after lights, or rather, candles and small lamps were extinguished. Silence was strict, enforced to preserve the contemplative atmosphere. The slightest noise could disturb not only sleep but spiritual focus. The night was punctuated by wakefulness for prayer. Midnight and early morning hours were especially sacred. Monks and nuns rose for matins or vigils, often navigating the dormitory in near darkness, whispering prayers, and moving carefully to avoid disturbing others. These periods of wakefulness were considered spiritually valuable. Enduring fatigue and maintaining discipline were forms of devotion. Beds were simple. Straw-stuffed mattresses, occasionally topped with a thin blanket or cloth, provided minimal comfort. Feather beds were rare, even among higher-ranking clergy. The focus was on purpose, not pleasure. Hard beds were believed to strengthen the body and the spirit, encouraging moderation and humility. Temperature and warmth were managed as best as possible. Canopies were uncommon, though heavy blankets or woolen covers were used. In particularly cold regions, additional layers of clothing provided insulation. Some monasteries encouraged shared warmth through proximity, though not in the intimate way of families. This was purely practical. Sleep deprivation was sometimes intentional. Certain nights were dedicated to extra prayers or fasting, reducing the amount of rest. These were not mistakes or punishments. They were exercises in spiritual discipline. The body endured, so the soul could focus. Monks and nuns believed that mastering the night was part of mastering oneself. Despite rigor, there were small comforts. Routine itself was reassuring. Every action had a place. Candles flickered softly before bedtime. Beds were aligned neatly. The same prayers were recited each night. Even in austerity, there was predictability and order. Monastic sleep also included attention to dreams. Dreams could be interpreted spiritually, as warnings or guidance from God. Some monks and nuns recorded visions in manuscripts, while others shared insights quietly. Sleep was both restorative and revelatory. The mind, freed from the demands of manual labor or worldly concerns, was open to subtle messages. Silence rules after compline. The final prayer before bed ensured that rest was uninterrupted. Conversation was minimal. Movement was discreet. Every sound, whether a shifting body or the rustle of a blanket, was noticed. The environment reinforced mindfulness and reflection. Sleep was not an escape. It was integrated into the sacred order of life. Even in these austere conditions, medieval humor persisted. Chronicles mention monks snoring loudly, accidentally knocking over candles, or jostling one another in tight dormitories. The human element remained. Discipline did not erase frailty, awkwardness, or the occasional mishap. Monastic sleep demonstrates how deeply culture shapes rest. For monks and nuns, sleep was never only biological. It was moral, ritualized, and socially regulated. Comfort was secondary. Purpose came first. Yet, in this rigor, there was a profound intimacy with the night. Darkness became a companion, silence a guide, and sleep a sacred act. Imagine it, a long dormitory, beds lined neatly, each sleeper focused inward. A candle flickers and dies. Outside, the wind rustles through stone walls. Inside, bodies settle, minds prepare for devotion. Midnight approaches. Some rise for prayer, some lie awake in quiet reflection. The night is alive with devotion and stillness. In the next chapter, we will leave monasteries and examine the medieval city. The contrast between urban noise, danger, and shared sleeping arrangements offers a completely different experience of nighttime life. For now, let the rhythm of monastic sleep linger in your mind. Hard beds, quiet rooms, devoted hearts, and the knowledge that every pause in the night has meaning. Medieval cities were alive, even when darkness fell. Unlike the quiet of rural villages, The streets of towns and urban centers thrummed with the echoes of human activity, animals, and machinery. Sleep in these places was shaped not just by the body's needs, but by the sounds, smells, and dangers of city life. For a medieval urbanite, night was both a refuge and a challenge. The first thing to understand is that cities were densely packed. Houses were built close together, often with shops or workshops on the ground floor and living quarters above. Streets were narrow and winding, made of dirt, stone, or cobbles. Fires, garbage, and the presence of animals meant that odors were strong, especially after dark. Sleep had to compete with all of this. Noise was constant. Taverns kept burning late with music, laughter, and sometimes shouting. Inns hosted travelers who snored, coughed, or argued into the night. Even in otherwise quiet neighborhoods, the occasional cart or horse disrupted the stillness. Residents learned to sleep through these sounds, or at least around them. Some developed earplugs of soft cloth, though they were far from universal. Others relied on habit. The more you lived with noise, the more you could ignore it. Fire was a constant concern. Urban homes were tightly packed and made largely of timber. One spark could destroy an entire street. Because of this, many people kept fires small or extinguished them entirely at night. Candles and lanterns provided light, but they were expensive and limited. Going to bed often meant entering darkness intentionally, with only a faint glow from a nearby candle or the street beyond the window. Sleeping arrangements reflected both social hierarchy and practicality. Wealthier urban residents might have private bedrooms above their shops, often with larger beds, curtains, and furs. They could afford attendants to manage fires, keep watch for thieves, and adjust bedding for warmth. The middle-class merchants, artisans, and clerks usually slept in multi-purpose rooms, often on upper floors where space allowed. The poor, including laborers, apprentices, and servants, slept on straw mattresses on the floor, sometimes with animals for warmth, or in communal rooms if their housing allowed. Privacy was rare. Even among the wealthy, attendants might remain nearby, guards could be posted, and servants sometimes slept in the same room. Middle-class families often shared sleeping spaces. Children and adults intertwined to conserve heat and space. Noise, movement, and body heat created a delicate balance. Roll too much, and you disturb someone else. Shift too little, and you grow stiff and cold. Seasonal changes dictated strategies for comfort. Winters were bitter, and urban heat was unreliable. Fireplaces were often shared between rooms or limited to kitchens, meaning bedrooms could be drafty and cold. Thick blankets, furs, and clothing layers were essential. People huddled together, adjusting positions to maximize warmth without encroaching on others' space. In summer, windows might be opened slightly, and bedding was lighter. Sleeping arrangements shifted subtly with the climate, reflecting the constant negotiation between comfort, survival, and available resources. Urban life brought unique dangers as well. Crime was a concern, especially in poorly lit neighborhoods. Thieves, muggers, and opportunistic intruders took advantage of the cover of night. Many houses were equipped with locks, though these were often rudimentary. Families developed strategies, keeping a fire burning, posting a guard or trusted family member, and situating beds away from doors and windows. In some areas, entire neighborhoods organized night watches, with bells or horns to signal danger. Animals, both domestic and wild, added another layer of complication. Cats roamed freely. Rats scuttled along beams and floors, and dogs often slept in or near the living spaces. Urban pests were relentless, and people accepted bites, scratches, and scurrying as part of the nightly experience. Smells, too, could be overwhelming. Manure from horses, waste from households, smoke from fires, and the occasional rotting food all contributed to a sensory experience far removed from modern expectations of cleanliness. Despite the challenges, nighttime in this city had rhythms and rituals. Residents often completed their evening prayers or household routines before sleep. Merchants might review accounts, artisans ensure tools were secure, and families tuck in children or adjust bedding. Some people used charms, herbs, or candles to ward off evil spirits, reflecting the same beliefs seen in rural and monastic life. Night was a liminal space, where the boundaries between danger, devotion, and rest were blurred. The waking hour between first and second sleep was present here as well, though shaped by urban concerns. Some city dwellers used it for prayer or reflection. Others might get up to 10 fires, check on livestock kept in stalls below the living quarters, or run small errands. The quiet moments offered opportunities for intimacy or contemplation, though the presence of others' family, servants, or neighbors meant these activities were often discreet. Children's sleep followed patterns of the household. Infants were swaddled and placed close to parents or caregivers. Older children shared beds, often crowded together for warmth. Apprentices, living in workshops or with masters, sometimes slept in large dormitory-style spaces where order and discipline were as important as comfort. Elderly family members were positioned for warmth and accessibility, particularly in winter. The sick or infirm were carefully monitored, with special attention to heating, bedding, and care during the night. The nocturnal environment of the city also shaped dreams and imagination. Darkness was associated with spirits, witches, and demons, particularly in areas where superstition ran strong. A strange noise or shadow could provoke anxiety, but also reinforced communal behaviors, neighbors checking on one another, children learning caution, and families preparing charms or prayers. The spiritual dimension of night, already emphasized in rural and monastic life, persisted in urban settings, but was interwoven with concrete concerns like theft, fire, and illness. Urban sleep, therefore, required negotiation on multiple levels, with bodies, temperature, noise, space, and danger. Every night, residents navigated practical realities alongside cultural and spiritual norms. Sleep was not passive. It was an active process of adaptation and management, where survival, comfort, and social expectations intersected. Humor and creativity softened the difficulties. Chronicles and anecdotes mention apprentices hiding under blankets to escape snoring masters, children tangled in shared bedding, and families improvising with straw, rags, and spare clothing to keep warm. Even in the dense, noisy, and sometimes dangerous urban environment, people found ways to rest, laugh, and maintain daily rhythms. City dwellers, like peasants and monks, adjusted to the night through careful planning. Fires were banked, blankets layered, beds shared strategically, and watchfulness maintained. Noise, light, and activity were filtered through habit. Over time, these routines created a unique urban rhythm, one that balanced rest with readiness, comfort with caution, and intimacy with the awareness of potential dangers. Consider it now: a narrow street, lamps flickering faintly, the murmur of distant conversation. Inside a timbered home, a family huddles for warmth, children nestled close, blankets pulled high. A fire flickers low in the hearth. The smell of smoke and straw mingles with the distant scent of horses and waste from the street below. Someone rises briefly to adjust bedding or check a latch. Elsewhere, a cat curls near a candle's glow. The night carries both calm and vigilance, a delicate tension held in rhythm with the city's pulse. Urban nights remind us that medieval sleep was never uniform. Contextual or urban, rich or poor, monastic or domestic shaped experience in profound ways. The city added layers of complexity: noise, crime, animals, and infrastructure challenges. Yet even here, humans adapted, negotiated, and found ways to rest. In the next chapter, we will focus on the vulnerable, children, the elderly, and the sick. Their experiences reveal how medieval households organized care and comfort during the night, and how sleep intersected with health and family dynamics. For now, let the city night settle in your imagination. Hear the distant clatter of carts, the occasional shout, the soft breathing of a household tucked above a workshop. Sense the layers of warmth, the shared bodies, the whispered prayers, and the faint glow of a dying fire. Sleep in the medieval city was never simple, but it was real, alive, and deeply human. In the medieval world, nighttime was a different experience for those who were vulnerable: children, the elderly, and the sick. Their sleep was shaped not only by the rhythms of the household and environment, but by the particular needs of bodies that were small, fragile, or failing. To understand how medieval people rested, it's important to see how these groups navigated the night and how families adapted around them. Children's sleep was a central concern for households. Babies were swaddled tightly in linen or wool, a practice meant to keep them warm, comforted, and still. Swaddling restricted movement but allowed infants to feel secure, as if they were back in the womb. Swaddled children were laid on straw mattresses, often in the same room as parents. Co-sleeping was common. Warmth, comfort, and protection were shared. Siblings were grouped together, parents between them or nearby to monitor rest. Families learned early that children's sleep was unpredictable. They woke frequently for feeding, warmth, or comfort. Young children, not swaddled but still small, often slept in the same bed as adults. This could be crowded and noisy, but it was practical. In small cottages or urban houses, space was limited. Co-sleeping conserved warmth and allowed adults to monitor safety. Older children might have small pallets on the floor or mattresses near the adults. They learned to sleep lightly, ready to stir if a parent moved or a sibling whimpered. Sleep was both restorative and social. Even unconscious rest was shared experience. Childcare at night was a constant negotiation. Parents balanced warmth, protection, and order. Infants were prone to sudden waking. Elderly family members might need attention, and the rest of the household had to adjust. In some cases, children slept with animals nearby, not for novelty, but for heat. Dogs or cats curled near children to help maintain body temperature, sometimes startling them with movement, sometimes comforting them. This intermingling of humans and animals was practical, not decorative. The elderly also faced challenges. Aging bodies struggled with cold, stiffness, and aches. Arthritis, rheumatism, and other ailments made lying down uncomfortable. Older individuals required thicker blankets, additional layers, or the warmth of others' bodies. Families adapted sleeping arrangements so that elderly members were positioned in the warmest areas, often near the center of the bed or the hearth. This care was not only practical but moral. Medieval societies valued honoring the aged, and tending to their nighttime comfort was part of that ethic. Sleep, for the elderly, was often fragmented. Pain or discomfort could wake them frequently, requiring readjustment, repositioning, or even minor care from family members. They might rise for the chamber pot, reposition blankets, or tend to other needs, often in quiet to avoid disturbing younger sleepers. Over time, these nightly adjustments became habitual, integrated into the household's rhythm. The elderly adapted, learning to make the most of warmth and comfort despite physical limitations. Illness dramatically altered sleep patterns. Sickness, whether acute or chronic, created unpredictability. Fevered bodies sought warmth. Aching joints required cushioning. Nausea or coughing demanded frequent movement. Families responded with care, adjusting bedding, heating rooms with fires or hot stones, and attending constantly to the sick person's comfort. In some cases, illness was contagious, so sleeping arrangements were modified to minimize risk while still offering warmth and attention. Herbal remedies and folk medicine played a role in sleep for the sick. Lavender, rosemary, and other herbs might be placed near the bed to soothe.com or protect against evil spirits. Hot compresses or warmed cloths were applied to aching limbs. Sometimes, the sick were given slightly elevated bedding or additional supports for their body. Medieval people understood empirically what would make sleep more bearable even without modern medicine. Caregiving at night was often communal. In extended households, multiple members might take shifts. A parent might wake to tend to a child, a sibling to the elderly, or a servant to the ill. Unlike modern expectations of uninterrupted sleep for all, medieval nights were a negotiated choreography of rest and attention. Noise, movement, and warmth were balanced carefully. There was a quiet understanding that one person's wakefulness was another's rest. Superstition and spiritual practice also influenced nighttime care. It was common to recite prayers over sick individuals, particularly at night. Families believed that divine protection was more effective during darkness. Children might be told bedtime stories with moral or protective lessons. Amulets, charms, and candles could be used near sickbeds to safeguard health. Fear and hope were intertwined. Fear of disease, spirits, or death, and hope for healing, recovery, or divine protection. Seasonal changes added further complexity. Winter nights were long and cold, amplifying the needs of the vulnerable. Families clustered together for warmth. Hot stones or heated bricks were strategically placed near children, the elderly, and the sick. During summer, ventilation was key. Windows might be opened slightly, blankets reduced, and beds arranged to allow airflow while still conserving heat for those who needed it. These adaptations were dynamic and responsive to environment, health, and social hierarchy. Despite challenges, nighttime could also offer small comforts. Stories told quietly before sleep, gentle singing, or soft humming helped children settle. For the elderly and sick, the presence of attentive family members was reassuring. Even in discomfort, the rhythm of routine, the familiar warmth of the household, and the gentle care of others created a sense of security. Sleep was never purely biological. It was emotional, social, and protective. humor and humanity persisted. Chronicles and household accounts described children waking and startling adults, pets causing minor chaos, or the elderly grumbling as blankets were adjusted. These moments reminded everyone that sleep, while vital, was embedded in life's unpredictable and often comical rhythms. Medieval nights were simultaneously serious and full of ordinary human quirks. Finally, the experience of the vulnerable highlights a key aspect of medieval sleep: adaptability. The household, rather than a single individual, dictated rest patterns. Care, warmth, supervision, and spiritual attention created conditions where sleep was possible, even under challenging circumstances. Everyone, young, old, ill, or healthy, contributed to the collective rhythm of the night. Sleep was a shared resource, negotiated and protected. Imagine a medieval night with these considerations in mind. A baby swaddled tightly sleeps beside a parent. Children stir occasionally, adjusting to the movements of others. An elderly relative shifts for warmth, sighing quietly. A sick person is tended, blankets rearranged, a soft prayer murmured. Animals curl near humans for heat. Firelight flickers across walls, and the household moves carefully in a delicate dance of vigilance, care, and shared rest. Outside, the wind howls, the streets are silent, and the darkness holds both danger and calm. This intimate view of sleep emphasizes that rest was never isolated. It was deeply social, moral, and practical. Medieval people understood that sleep was as much about protection, warmth, and care as it was about fatigue. Each night was a negotiation of space, heat, noise, and attention. The vulnerable were tended, bodies and minds rested, and life could continue another day. In the next chapter, we will explore the dangers of the medieval night more broadly. From fire and thieves to supernatural fears, the world outside the household shaped how everyone from peasants to nobles approached sleep. Understanding these perils reveals why nighttime rest was both precious and precarious. For now, picture the household: warmth, shared bodies adjusted, prayers whispered, and care given. Sleep in the medieval world was a web of protection, empathy, and adaptation, shared human experience shaped by vulnerability, love, and survival. The medieval night was not merely dark, it was dangerous. For everyone from peasants in rural cottages to merchants in bustling cities, from the devout monk to the noble lord knight, brought risks that shaped sleep, behavior, and mindset. Fire, crime, animals, and supernatural fears made the hours after sunset a time to be cautious, creative, and vigilant. Understanding these dangers helps explain why medieval people approached bedtime with preparation, routine, and sometimes a touch of anxiety. Fire was perhaps the most immediate and terrifying threat. Medieval homes were mostly timber-framed, with thatched roofs in villages and densely packed streets in towns. A single spark from a candle, hearth, or stove could ignite an entire dwelling, or, worse, a whole street. Fires spread fast and could destroy homes, food stores, and livelihoods. Families developed strategies to minimize risk. Fires were carefully banked at night, candles extinguished in a deliberate order, and hearths cleared of excess flammable material. In wealthier households, servants might be assigned to monitor embers, ensuring that a small blaze did not turn catastrophic. Even so, the knowledge that one careless spark could mean disaster added tension to bedtime. Crime was another major concern. Urban and rural residents alike feared thieves, burglars, and bandits. Streets were dark, narrow, and poorly patrolled. Windows were sometimes barred, doors locked with primitive mechanisms, and valuables kept out of sight. Noble households employed guards or attendants to watch for intruders, while peasants relied on communal vigilance. Even inside, families slept with one eye open. Beds were often arranged so that doors and windows were visible. Children were kept near adults, and the household's defensible objects were within reach. This constant awareness of potential theft shaped sleep patterns, making vigilance as important as rest. Animals were a dual-edged aspect of nighttime life. Domesticated creatures like dogs, cats, and chickens were valued for warmth, companionship, and protection, but they could also disrupt sleep. Cats prowled at night, knocking over objects or wandering across beds. Dogs barked at imaginary intruders or stirred from discomfort. Larger animals kept in stables or barns, horses, cows, pigs, sometimes created noise, odors, and disturbance. Meanwhile, wild predators lurked near villages. Wolves, foxes, and even bears in more remote regions posed a threat. Residents adapted by co-sleeping with dogs or sleeping near hearths for heat and sound awareness, balancing comfort with defense. Supernatural fears added another dimension. Darkness was a canvas for imagination, superstition, and caution. Medieval people believed in witches, demons, and restless spirits. Dreams could foretell misfortune or convey divine warnings. Nightmares were sometimes blamed on malicious forces pressing upon the sleeper. Sleep paralysis, a phenomenon widely misunderstood until modern times, was interpreted as an encounter with a demon or a spirit. Charms, prayers, and rituals were common. Homes might be sprinkled with holy water, crosses hung above beds, or herbs like rosemary, rue, and lavender placed near sleeping areas to ward off evil. This layer of caution intertwined spirituality with practical behavior, influencing how and where people slept. Night was also morally charged. Darkness was considered a time of temptation and sin. People believed that unobserved misbehavior, even in sleep, could leave the soul vulnerable. Monks and nuns structured nighttime with prayer and discipline to protect both body and spirit. Lay people, while less rigid, still recited prayers or performed small rituals before bed. Candles or lamps provided not only light but symbolic protection. The moral dimension of nighttime shaped attitudes toward vigilance, the company kept, and the use of space. Children, the elderly, and the sick were particularly exposed. Families took extra measures to ensure their safety, placing them in warmer areas, closer to adults, or nearer to exits in case of emergencies. Vulnerable individuals were monitored more closely, and household routines were often adjusted around their needs. This meant that the sleep of a family was interconnected. One person's wakefulness often ensured the safety and comfort of others. Humor persisted despite danger. Chronicles and household records occasionally joke about cats knocking over candles, children waking at inconvenient times, or servants fumbling with firewood in the dark. Even the gravest threats were part of daily life, and people learned to navigate risk with a combination of caution, experience, and human resilience. Nights were serious but lived with awareness of small absurdities that softened the tension. Seasonal variation influenced risk. Winter nights were longer, colder, and more dangerous. Fires were essential for warmth, making fire hazards more pressing. Thieves could travel more easily in long, dark nights, and storms could cause structural damage. Summer nights were shorter, but open windows and lighter clothing introduced their own vulnerabilities. Cool air could bring illness, and windows could be entry points for intruders or animals. Awareness of environmental risk was constant. Community strategies were common. Villagers organized night watches, and cities established rudimentary patrols. Bell towers could signal danger, a fire, a thief, or other emergency. Households reinforced doors and secured valuables. Families maintained rituals for protection, combining practical and spiritual precautions. Nighttime was a time of shared responsibility. Sleep did not occur in isolation. It was embedded in social structures, expectations, and neighborhood vigilance. Even noble households were not immune to danger. Guard rotations, fire precautions, and attention to doors and windows were part of nightly routine. Large estates sometimes had walled courtyards, dogs patrolling grounds, and attendants posted near entrances. Despite wealth and privilege, darkness demanded respect and preparation. Sleep, even among kings and lords, required planning and caution. Yet danger also shaped rhythm and creativity. Humans adapted to their environment. Fire precautions, spatial arrangements, and co-sleeping were responses to tangible threats. Prayers, charms, and rituals reflected both spiritual belief and psychological reassurance. Noise and light were managed to balance protection with rest. This is why the medieval night was both alive and purposeful, a delicate dance between vulnerability and resilience. Imagine a village at night. The hearth flickers in one cottage, smoke rising gently into the darkness. Dogs curl near children's feet, while cats prowl along walls. A mother whispers a prayer as she adjusts her swaddled infant. Outside, shadows shift under trees. Wolves are distant but remembered. Fire danger is real, so embers are banked carefully, candles extinguished. Every sound, movement, and gesture is calibrated for safety, comfort, and the rhythm of the night. In the city, the scenario is different but equally intense. Narrow streets are dark, noises echo unpredictably, and intruders may be nearby. Guards patrol, families check doors, and animals move through shared spaces. Sleep is fragmented, attentive, yet still restorative. Residents negotiate with risk constantly, balancing the body's need for rest with the mind's need for vigilance. The medieval night reminds us that sleep is never only biological. It is a negotiation of comfort, protection, warmth, morality, and social expectation. People adapted to their circumstances, creating strategies to survive the hazards of darkness. Fire, crime, animals, and supernatural fears shaped behavior, rituals, and household organization. Sleep was both precious and precarious, a vital resource that required planning, attention, and care. Humor, ritual, and resourcefulness made danger manageable. Families, monks, nobles, and city dwellers alike learned to coexist with threat. Small charms, careful fires, attentive co-sleeping, and shared vigilance allowed sleep to occur despite real and imagined dangers. The night was alive with potential peril, yet life continued, sustained by adaptation, creativity, and courage. As dawn approached, those who had navigated the night, children, the elderly, the sick, peasants, merchants, and nobles would awaken, relieved but alert. The experience of danger heightened the appreciation of morning, light, and the possibility of rest uninterrupted. Night taught lessons in caution, preparation, and resilience, shaping not only sleep but daily life, work, and social order. In the next chapter, we will follow the day's first light, how medieval people woke, prepared for labor, and reflected on the role of sleep in sustaining life. The transition from darkness to morning reveals how integral rest, vigilance, and adaptation were to medieval existence. For now, imagine the medieval night fully: shadows flickering, fires banked, charms in place, family and animals coiled together for warmth, and the careful negotiation of rest amidst real and imagined threats. It is a night alive with tension, protection, and resilience, a night that shapes every waking moment that follows. Morning in the medieval world was not simply the time to open one's eyes. It was a transition from darkness to light, from vulnerability to activity, from rest to labor. For everyone from peasants in cottages to nobles in their chambers, monks in cloisters to merchants in bustling towns, the moment of waking was structured, purposeful, and deeply entwined with daily life. Understanding how medieval people rose from sleep reveals just how much their nights shaped their days. The first cue for waking often came from nature itself. Birds sang, light filtered through windows or thatched roofs, and the world outside stirred. In rural areas, the crowing of roosters and the rustling of livestock served as natural alarms. Peasants, whose schedules were dictated by daylight, rose early to maximize working hours. The transition from sleep to activity was sudden for some, gentle for others, but universally tied to the rhythms of the natural world. Church bells played a significant role, particularly in towns and cities. The ringing of the morning bell, or matins, was a call to prayer and a signal that the day had officially begun. Bells echoed through streets and villages, providing both spiritual and practical cues. Nobles and merchants, even those who could afford personal attendance, were aware of the rhythm imposed by these sounds. Monks and nuns, in particular, rose at precise hours dictated by the canonical schedule, moving from night prayers directly into work or study. Peasant families had a more fluid but still disciplined routine. In winter, long nights meant a later rising, though work still began at first light. In summer, mornings were earlier, sometimes before the sun had fully risen. Children were roused gently, if at all, as families adjusted to the needs of labor and season. Adults often tended livestock immediately, feeding animals, cleaning stables, or carrying out essential chores before breakfast. The day began with practical care and attentiveness, structured by both need and environment. Waking was often noisy. Animals stirred alongside humans. Dogs barked, cats prowled, chickens clucked, and livestock brayed. Fires were rekindled, embers stirred, and water brought for cooking and washing. The smell of smoke, damp earth, and straw pervaded the household. These sensory experiences signaled the start of the day, grounding medieval people in the physical reality of life after rest. For the nobility, morning was a blend of ritual, comfort, and preparation. Attendants might help with dressing, arranging hair, or preparing breakfast. Chambers were often kept warm with fires and layered blankets, ensuring that the transition from sleep to activity was gradual and comfortable. Nobles might rise later than peasants, but their routines were highly structured. Prayers, hygiene, and attending to business before stepping into the demands of their households and estates. The presence of servants ensured that morning activities were orderly, efficient, and reflective of status. Monks and nuns experienced one of the strictest awakenings. Rising often occurred before sunrise, dictated by the hours of prayer. The day began with chanting, meditation, or study, leaving little time for personal indulgence. Sleep was deliberately limited and carefully scheduled to ensure balance with devotion, labor, and reflection. Rising from bed was an act of obedience, a physical acknowledgement of spiritual discipline. Even minimal warmth, comfort, or noise had to be balanced with adherence to rules. Sleep inertia, the grogginess that follows waking, was experienced universally, though interpreted differently. Peasants might see it as a minor inconvenience, quickly overcome by immediate labor. Monks and nuns understood it as a challenge to discipline. Resisting lethargy was part of spiritual training. Nobles navigated it with assistance from attendants or gradual awakening through warmth, light, and gentle sounds. Even in this simple biological response, medieval people found ways to integrate sleep into a broader framework of daily purpose. Morning hygiene was minimal for most. Water was drawn from wells, rivers, or cisterns, sometimes heated if resources allowed. Bathing was occasional, often limited to hand and face washing. Teeth were cleaned with cloth, herbs, or small sticks. The priorities were practical, clean enough to work, eat, and socialize, but rarely indulgent. Nobility might have more elaborate morning routines, but cleanliness, like sleep, was functional rather than luxurious. Breakfast was modest for most, hearty for some. Peasants ate bread, porridge, cheese, or ale weak, often consumed instead of water. Nobles might enjoy more varied foods, eggs, meats, and pastries, sometimes accompanied by spiced drinks. The meal was often eaten quickly, as the day's work awaited. Children, elderly, and sick family members were served according to need, again reflecting the household's collective rhythm rather than individual preference. Morning prayer was widespread. Even those outside monastic life might recite a brief blessing, a psalm, or a simple acknowledgement of God's presence. This practice linked the night to the day, the private experience of sleep to public or communal activity. It provided continuity, structure, and reassurance's gentle bridge between rest and labor. Waking also meant confronting the consequences of the previous night. Was bedding wet, burned, or disturbed by animals? Were fires banked correctly? Were doors secured against theft? Minor adjustments, small repairs, and quick attention to problems were common morning tasks. Even after sleep, the vigilance required of night did not end immediately. Medieval mornings were extensions of nocturnal care, blending recovery with readiness. The rhythms of morning shaped behavior, work, and social interaction. Children learned responsibility by helping tend animals or prepare meals. Adults moved quickly from rest to labor, guided by physical need, environmental cues, and social expectations. Monastic schedules instilled discipline and reflection. Nobles balanced comfort, decorum, and preparation for daily duties. Across social classes, waking was both personal and communal, individual and social, biological and cultural. Seasonality continued to influence routines. In winter, mornings were dark and bitter, fires were reignited, clothing layered, and chores adjusted to conserve heat. In summer, light and warmth arrived early, allowing for longer workdays and slightly more leisurely awakenings. Sleep duration and quality directly influenced morning efficiency and well-being. Medieval people were intimately aware of these connections. Humor, resilience, and improvisation persisted. Children groaned, pets interfered, and mistakes were made in tending fires or arranging bedding. Households learned to accommodate minor chaos, adjusting routines without losing purpose. Life continued, with sleep and waking forming a continuous, negotiated cycle rather than discrete, isolated experiences. Finally, waking was a moment of reflection. Medieval people recognized that sleep restored body and mind, prepared them for labor, and offered insight into spiritual, social, and personal matters. Even a hurried morning carried traces of the night. Dreams lingered, warmth persisted, and habits established during sleep influenced behavior and mood. The transition from darkness to light was more than biological, it was existential, moral, and deeply human. Imagine it, a peasant cottage at dawn. Birds call, light filters through straw-thatched windows, children stir in beds of straw, dogs stretch and yawn, adults rise, pull on layered clothing, and stoke the embers. A mother swaddles a baby, a father checks the animals. Laughter, whispered instructions, and the occasional groan fill the room. Outside, smoke curls into the morning air. The world awakens, slowly but deliberately. In noble chambers, the scenario is quieter, more controlled. Attendants gently rouse their lord or lady. Furs are adjusted, blankets pulled back, fires are tended, breakfast prepared, and prayers whispered. The transition from sleep to activity is structured, ceremonial, and efficient. Outside the windows, streets and fields stir. Inside, bodies and minds adjust to the day with ritual, comfort, and attention. In monastic dormitories, the day begins with a soft, disciplined rhythm. Lights are low, steps careful, prayers recited. Bodies accustomed to waking abruptly adjust to physical and spiritual activity seamlessly. Sleep's influence is evident in stamina, focus, and the ease of performing required tasks. Morning, then, is a continuation of the night. It is the moment when preparation meets execution, rest meets labor, and the individual reconnects with the household and community. Medieval people understood the profound link between sleep and wakefulness. They recognized that rest was not a passive state, but a necessary precursor to survival, productivity, and spiritual practice. As the sun climbs, bodies stretch, fires burn, and the household comes alive. The night's darkness recedes, but its rhythms linger. Lessons learned, warmth shared, vigilance maintained, and rest achieved all contribute to the resilience and structure of medieval life. Sleep was a bridge, and morning the first step across it, shaping the day in subtle and profound ways. For now, picture the gentle transition, light creeping through windows, smoke from fires rising, bodies moving slowly yet purposefully. Think of hands adjusting blankets, children yawning, elders stretching, and families beginning the day in a coordinated, shared rhythm. This is how medieval people woke, alert, aware, nourished by sleep, prepared for labor, and ready to meet the challenges of a world both beautiful and harsh. It's easy to look at medieval sleep and think of it as primitive, uncomfortable, or quaint. Feather beds and straw mattresses, segmented sleep, co-sleeping, nocturnal prayers. Sure, it all seems exotic. Yet the medieval approach to rest profoundly influenced the way humans experience sleep today. Our modern habits, our struggles with insomnia, our obsession with uninterrupted 80-hour sleep, even the rhythms of work and leisure, all trace subtle roots back to centuries of nighttime life before artificial light transformed our nights. First, consider the natural rhythm of darkness and light. Medieval people rose with the sun and went to bed shortly after sunset, guided not by clocks but by environmental cues. The concept of a full 8-hour stretch was largely foreign. Instead, sleep was segmented. First sleep, waking period. Second sleep. This rhythm allowed time for prayer, reflection, chores, and even intimate moments. Modern sleep science has recently rediscovered this pattern, noting that humans naturally tend toward shorter sleep periods separated by a period of quiet wakefulness. What we often consider insomnia today may, in fact, be a misalignment with our historical biological rhythm. Artificial lighting dramatically changed everything. With candles, lanterns, and eventually electricity, nights grew longer in terms of activity and shorter in terms of darkness. People could stay awake longer, work, socialize, and read well past sunset. This disruption of the natural cycle contributed to the modern expectation of uninterrupted sleep. We forget that for centuries, waking at midnight was normal, even necessary. Medieval sleep teaches us that sleep is flexible, socially constructed, and deeply intertwined with environmental cues. Another influence comes from the communal aspect of rest. Co-sleeping with children, elderly relatives, or household members was not unusual. It was practical, moral, and warm. Today, the nuclear family often sleeps separately. Bedrooms are private, and co-sleeping can even be stigmatized. Yet studies suggest that sleeping near others, whether a partner, child, or pet, offers warmth, comfort, and psychological security. Medieval people intuitively understood what modern science has begun to quantify, that shared sleep can enhance safety, reduce stress, and support well-being. Fire and heating strategies also shaped modern thinking about thermal comfort. Medieval households used fireplaces, bed curtains, hot stones, and animals to manage temperature at night. While central heating has made these strategies largely obsolete, the underlying principle remains. Sleep is profoundly influenced by temperature. People intuitively arranged bedding, clothing, and room heat to optimize rest. Modern sleep studies confirm this. Body temperature regulation is crucial for restorative sleep. Medieval ingenuity, born from necessity, prefigured what science confirms today. Monastic practices left a cultural and spiritual legacy. The disciplined approach to sleep, integrating prayer, reflection, and scheduled rest, is echoed in contemporary ideas about bedtime routines. Meditation, reading, and intentional preparation for sleep come in modern advice mirror practices that monks and nuns followed centuries ago. Structured routines, even in an age without clocks or electricity, facilitated both physical rest and mental clarity. The medieval night, in this sense, was not merely a time of inactivity, but a deliberate, mindful experience of transition, reflection, and preparation. The segmented sleep pattern also had societal implications. Tasks that we now compress into daytime hours, core work, communication, personal reflection, were spread across the night. Waking periods allowed for quiet productivity or spiritual engagement. Modern life, compressed by rigid work schedules, artificial light, and social expectation, often eliminates these natural pauses. The medieval night reminds us that rest and activity need not be mutually exclusive, and that strategic wakefulness can coexist with restorative sleep. Even the fear and danger of the night shaped cultural practices that echo today. Medieval people's attentiveness to fire, theft, and personal security influenced the design of homes, streets, and urban planning. Locks, alarms, and neighborhood watches have medieval antecedents. Fear, preparation, and vigilance were integrated into the very architecture of daily life. Today, we might take for granted security systems or community safety, but they descend from centuries of humans negotiating sleep amidst real risk. Furthermore, sleep was moral, social, and spiritual, not purely biological. The medieval concept that good sleep was intertwined with virtue, prayer, and moderation challenges modern assumptions. Today, sleep is often viewed narrowly as a physiological need. Medieval people treated rest as a holistic practice, a way to honor the body, maintain social bonds, cultivate virtue, and interface with the divine. Even modern trends toward mindful sleep and pre-bedtime routines echo this integration of body, mind, and spirit. Medical theory of the time also influenced modern sleep practices indirectly. Galenic and Aristotelian ideas about humors, digestion, and bodily balance informed when and how people slept. Avoiding excessive sleep, keeping the body neither too hot nor too cold, and coordinating rest with diet and activity were early forms of sleep hygiene. While the theory may seem outdated, the underlying principle sleep is affected by lifestyle, environment, and routine remains central to contemporary recommendations. The decline of segmented sleep, co-sleeping, and attentive household care during the industrial era has had consequences. Artificial light, urbanization, rigid work schedules, and modern housing have compressed sleep into long but often fragmented blocks. Insomnia, sleep deprivation, and stress reflect a mismatch between our evolved needs and modern life. Looking back at medieval practices, we see that flexibility, environmental awareness, and social integration supported more natural sleep patterns. There is much to learn from the medieval night about balance, adaptation, and human rhythm. Finally, medieval sleep reminds us that rest is cultural. The ways people sleep, the rhythms they follow, the rituals they observe, and the dangers they negotiate are deeply shaped by society, environment, and belief. Our contemporary obsession with optimal sleep may overlook the fact that humans have always adapted to diverse circumstances. Fire, darkness, danger, season, social hierarchy, and spirituality all shaped when, how, and where people slept. Modern habits are merely the latest adaptation in a long historical continuum. Imagine it, a medieval household at the cusp of night and day. First sleep has ended, the household has awoken briefly, and second sleep begins, structured by warmth, prayer, and awareness. Across centuries, that rhythm persists in echoes, in our tendency to wake at night, in our need for comfort and warmth, in our careful preparation for rest. The medieval world teaches that sleep is active, adaptive, and intertwined with life itself. By studying how people slept centuries ago, we gain insight into the fundamental needs of the human body and mind. The medieval night was not a period of mere inactivity. It was a time of preparation, vigilance, ritual, and adaptation. Its lessons resonate today, reminding us that sleep is more than a biological necessity. is a lived, negotiated, and profoundly human experience. As we move into the final chapter, we will reflect on sleep as a shared human experience across centuries, inviting the listener to imagine resting as medieval people did, surrounded by darkness, silence, and the rhythms of life itself. As we reach the end of this journey through the medieval night, it's time to pause and imagine yourself lying down as people did centuries ago. Darkness surrounds you, but it is not empty. It is alive with the textures, sounds, and rhythms of a world profoundly different from our own. The night is quiet, yet full of subtle activity: the flicker of firelight, the rustle of straw, the soft breathing of family members, the occasional scurry of a cat, and the distant calls of animals outside. Sleep in the medieval world was never simple, but it was deeply human, a shared experience across time and space. To lie down as a medieval person did is to acknowledge the absence of artificial light. No glowing screens, no buzzing electronics, no fluorescent lamps to extend the day. Darkness is total yet comforting, a protective blanket that marks the boundary between waking and dreaming. The night carries its own weight, its own rhythm. First sleep arrives shortly after sunset, and the body surrenders to rest. Yet even in slumber, the mind remains attuned to the environment. The distant barking of dogs, the faint creak of timbers, the soft warmth of shared blankets. Each sound and sensation is part of a careful negotiation between comfort and awareness, safety and relaxation. Consider the beds themselves, whether a straw pallet in a peasant cottage, a feather bed in a noble chamber, or a hard dormitory bed in a monastery. Each was designed with practicality and survival in mind. The scent of straw, the faint chill of night air, the weight of blankets, and the warmth of co-sleepers all created a sensory tapestry that shaped sleep. Today, we might think of our beds as purely for comfort, but medieval sleepers experienced them as part of a larger system, a space for warmth, protection, reflection, and family connection. Fire played an essential role in medieval sleep. Hearths were banked carefully at night, embers glowing faintly beneath a layer of ash. Bed curtains were drawn to conserve heat, and sometimes animals were allowed to sleep near humans, providing both warmth and subtle reassurance. Hot stones or bricks were placed strategically under bedding to provide comfort in cold months. This attentiveness to temperature reflects a deep understanding of the body's needs and the interplay between rest and environment. Modern sleep science confirms that temperature regulation is critical for restorative sleep, suggesting that medieval people, through centuries of trial and error, had intuitively mastered aspects of optimal rest. Sleeping clothes, or the choice to sleep without them, further shaped the experience. Linen nightshirts, chemises, or even sleeping naked were decisions guided by climate, class, and personal preference. In cold winter months, layering and co-sleeping conserved heat. In summer, lighter clothing and open windows offered relief. Medieval people approached sleep pragmatically, balancing modesty, warmth, and comfort. They understood, consciously or not, that the body's state at night influenced not only rest, but health, energy, and productivity the following day. The segmented sleep pattern: first sleep, waking period. Second sleep offers insight into the fluidity of rest. During the waking interval, people engaged in prayer, reflection, chores, or intimacy. This interlude between sleep cycles was natural, functional, and socially integrated. Modern insomnia may partly reflect our departure from this rhythm. In medieval times, waking at midnight was not a failure but a continuation of a carefully structured nocturnal routine. It was a time for vigilance, contemplation, or human connection, nestled within the broader framework of rest. Vigilance, in fact, was a constant theme. Even during sleep, medieval people remained attuned to potential dangers: fire, theft, animals, and supernatural forces. Charm, prayer, and ritual complemented practical strategies, creating a multi-layered approach to nighttime safety. Co-sleeping and shared warmth offered protection, while bed placement, locks, and strategic observation maintained security. Sleep was never passive. It was active, negotiated, and communal. This awareness fostered resilience, adaptability, and mindfulness qualities that continue to influence human sleep, even in an era of artificial safety and climate control. Nighttime in medieval Europe was also moral and spiritual. Sleep was seen as a gift from God, a time to honor the body and soul, and an opportunity to cultivate virtue. Bedtime prayers, protective charms, and careful attention to conduct before rest linked physical comfort to ethical and spiritual life. Modern bedtime routines, though less explicitly spiritual, often reflect similar patterns: reading, reflection, meditation, and preparation for restorative sleep. These practices echo centuries-old understanding that how we approach rest profoundly affects both body and mind. Children, the elderly, and the sick added further depth to the household night. Parents adjusted blankets, repositioned infants, and ensured warmth and safety. Elders were tended carefully, with layered bedding and proximity to heat. The ill were monitored, their discomfort alleviated with herbs, hot stones, or gentle support. The night was a shared experience of care, empathy, and adaptation. Sleep, in this context, was not solitary but intertwined with social responsibility, compassion, and communal rhythm. Even in urban settings, with noise, crowds, and dense housing, people adapted creatively. Fireplaces, bed placement, curtains, and co-sleeping allowed rest amidst potential danger. Vigilance remained part of the routine, yet households found ways to negotiate noise, smells, and movement. Humor and ingenuity softened the challenges. Pets curled near sleepers, children stirred and startled parents, and missteps in tending fires or bedding were met with laughter as much as caution. Night was simultaneously serious and ordinary, dangerous and comforting, a complex space of human experience. Dreams and imagination flourished in this environment. Without electric distractions, the mind wandered freely. Nightmares, divine visions, and reflective thoughts were common. Waking intervals allowed contemplation and introspection. Sleep was more than biological. It was psychological, emotional, and cultural. Dreams were messages, moral guidance, or simply reflections of daily life, tying the nocturnal world to the inner life of the sleeper. As dawn approached, the transition to day was both gradual and profound. The night's darkness receded, light filtered through windows, fires burned brighter, and household rhythms resumed. First and second sleep merged into waking consciousness. Bodies stretched, families stirred, prayers were recited, and labor awaited. The nights, lessons, care, vigilance, warmth, shared experience, and spiritual attentiveness prepared the medieval world for the day ahead. Modern mornings, with alarms, coffee, and artificial light, lack the layered rhythm of medieval dawn, but echoes remain. Stretching, reflection, and preparation are universal, linking centuries of human experience. To lie down across the centuries is to acknowledge continuity. Despite differences in beds, clothing, light, and social organization, the fundamental needs remain the same: warmth, safety, care, and rest. Sleep is a deeply human activity, shaped by environment, society, and culture. Medieval people approached it with ingenuity, adaptation, and ritual, balancing risk with comfort, practicality with morality, and survival with reflection. So tonight, as you lie down, imagine yourself in a medieval chamber or cottage. Feel the straw beneath you, the faint warmth of a fire, the presence of loved ones near you. Hear distant sounds, the occasional animal, the rustle of a blanket, the soft breathing of family or companions. Sense the darkness, heavy yet protective, and the rhythm of the night, carrying first sleep, waking, and second sleep in its gentle arc. Know that across centuries, humans have shared this need, negotiating danger, comfort, and reflection in equal measure. The medieval night was more than a period of rest. It was a lived experience, shaped by care, adaptation, and shared human rhythm. It teaches us that sleep is a complex interplay of body, mind, society, and environment. Even as modern life separates us from darkness, danger, and co-sleeping warmth, the lessons remain. Preparation matters, environment matters, ritual matters, and care for the vulnerable matters. Sleep is not simply a biological function. It is a cultural, social, and profoundly human act. As your eyes grow heavy, imagine the medieval night closing in around you. The warmth of blankets, the gentle presence of loved ones or animals, the faint glow of embers, and the soft murmur of night prayers all cocoon you. Drift into rest, guided by rhythms that have cradled humans for centuries. First sleep arrives, then a brief waking, then second sleep, seamless and natural. In this, you share a human experience that stretches across time, the simple, profound, and enduring act of lying down, surrendering to rest, and rising renewed. Sleep well, knowing that the medieval world, with all its darkness, danger, and care, was not so different from our own. a place where rest, ritual, and human connection formed the foundation for survival, reflection, and life itself. And that brings us to the quiet end of tonight's journey into the past. As the candles dim and the straw beds settle, we hope this glimpse into how medieval people slept helped you relax, unwind, and drift a little closer to rest. If you enjoyed this calm walk through history, don't forget to gently tap the like button. It helps the channel more than you might think. Feel free to share your thoughts or questions in the comments, or tell us what part of medieval life you'd like to explore next. If you're new here, consider subscribing for more calm history stories meant to soothe the mind, spark curiosity, and help you fall asleep. And if you're not quite ready for rest yet, you'll find more peaceful history waiting for you on the screen. Until next time, sleep well and good night.